Hey, good morning. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum at the Wilson Center. And I'm really excited that you all are joining us here today online to have a cool conversation with Stanley Chen, who is a science fiction writer from China. And I have to kind of start out explaining that this is really kind of a yuan fun, kind of a fate moment here that brought together my work at the China Environment Forum and my love for science fiction. It actually started about a week before, in 2020, about a week before the shutdown in DC, where we all had to run home. My friend Karen Mansell lent me a book of Chinese, contemporary Chinese science fiction stories, and it was called Invisible Planets. And so when the shutdown came, I grabbed my computer and my science fiction book and I ran home. And so I had a lot more reading time. And so in that book, there were three stories by Stanley. And one of them, Stanley, it was the Year of the Rat story,
Yep.
which I don't know if it was okay to say, but I laughed a lot on that story. And I also was really intrigued by it. And it led me to go online and find out that you had published a book in 2013 called Waste Tide. Well, guess what? For the last few years, I've been doing work on waste in China. And in the last year and a half, the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership, they gave me a grant for a project called Turning the Tide on Waste in
Oh,
Asia, plastic
wow.
waste. And so we've been doing meetings and publications and research, doing, dumpster diving, and looking at the kind of policies and citizen action and also innovation, scientific innovation to solve the plastic problem. So really, it's kind of like my two worlds have collided. I'm doing my work here, and I love science fiction, and clearly you do too, because this is your life. I mean, you are. I don't like reading bios, and I think today we're having a one-on-one, so your bio is going to come out in the conversation. But
Mhm.
I should tell the people tuning in that Stanley he's called a near fiction sci-fi author. And I'm curious if Stanley, if you agree with these descriptions, that you are an eco-fiction solar punk writer, and Waste Tide. What I was kind of disappointed, some of the reviewers, they call it an eco-techno thriller. And I'm like, where, you didn't say science fiction,
Yeah.
but I don't know, science fiction is a story. But all right, so let's kind of kick off our conversation. And I want to ask you, so Waste Tide we're going to anchor today's talk on Waste Tide, but we're going to go other places. It's a science fiction story that takes on trash, climate change, and environmental justice, global economic system. Why did you write this book? And after you tell us that, give us a short description of the book, but don't give too much away, because you want people to get it and not too many spoilers.
Right. So thanks for having me here, Jennifer, and so lovely to meet you virtually. So yeah, I totally agree. That's Yuan Fen here. And speaking of the book Waste Tide, actually it was written back in, I think, 10 years ago, just exactly 10 years ago. So like all the stories from China, it started from a dinner. So back in 2011, when I traveled back to Shantou, which is my hometown, a small city in Guangdong province, not far from Hong Kong. So I met one of my childhood friend, Luo, so who has working for an American recycling company. So he told me there's a small town named Guiyu, so very close to my hometown. It's only 60 kilometers away, but I never heard of that. So that's the very first time I get to know this town. So Guiyu in Chinese means the precious island. So I just twisted a little bit in the book, so it's like Silicon Island, but the pronunciation in Chinese is actually the same. So so there's only 1 hour's drive from the city where I live in. So it was called the center of the world electronic waste recycling by the media, and that triggered my curiosity. So I went there, I saw something, the the recycling industry there and the people there who used to suffer a lot from this kind of messy environments. So it's the very beginning of my idea how I should I should tell the story. So I decided to put it into a science fiction because I think it's a better way to do rather than an anthropology report nonfiction, because I think it's totally resonate to the people around the world, not only in China, but also other countries. So that's what I found very shocking there. And I during my research afterwards, so I found it's just a small piece of the global electronic waste landscape, and it's a reflection of a bigger picture there, like international geopolitical imbalance, and also the this kind of unsustainable way of economic and living style. So I put all this in this book. It's about in this fictional small island called Silicon Isle. So there's a bunch of people who are working and living on electronic waste recycling. And there's a group of people called the waste worker. One of the protagonists, Mimi. So she's a very lower class female worker, and she just suffer a lot from this kind of like environment and also the working style. So, and by coincidentally, she was infected by some mysterious virus and turned into cyborg. So that's how everything began to roll like a roller coaster. So it turned to, I'll not spoil too much, but it's definitely there's some action, there's some theory, of course, there's some science fiction elements there. So you can put all these labels on this book. But the most important things I want to review and to deliver this message about like the waste and the relationship between the waste and our daily life from this book. So that's basically the idea.
Yeah, well, in some ways, your science fiction book isn't totally fiction. I mean,
Yeah,
because again, Guiyu has been cleaned up a lot in the
right,
last
right,
10 years,
right.
and China, as you know, because you're there, that
Mhm.
in the past since 2013, at least from when the English book came out in 2013,
Right,
that was the year around that time the government started their war against pollution, and they
right,
started air pollution, water pollution, and in the last few years, the front line of the battle is with waste in
right,
China. And so I
right.
thought, wow, this guy was really, you wrote this before we had the war on waste in China.
Right,
And in my work that I've been doing, particularly in the last year and a half, where like last year we did a lot of, unfortunately because of COVID, I couldn't travel the way I was supposed to, but I got journalists and other people to write about the waste problems in Indonesia. I mean,
mhm,
ocean plastic leakage is number one from China, and Indonesia is number
right,
two. And
right,
it's just shocking, the images that you see, but also I think a lot of Americans maybe wouldn't relate to the idea of Mimi, like, a waste picker,
mhm,
living among all this garbage. That seems
right,
like maybe more science fiction, but that's the
right,
reality, that there's a
right,
lot, millions of people around the world. This is how they make their living. So
right.
here's a question for you. I know that some people reading the book would say that the man Chen Kai-tsung, that maybe
Mhm,
he was the hero, but I
mhm.
actually think Mimi's the hero. And
Yeah,
and and I don't know if you agree with that, because I mean, again, readers can interpret as they like. You can't control it once your baby book has been delivered to the world. But I was curious, because you wrote her really well, and the people, the kind of the dynamics between them, and I was wondering, I mean, you mentioned that visit, but did you interview? I mean, how did you capture the waste picker, waste sorter role and the people so well?
so actually I did a lot of like few studies and research. Like also there's some anthropology report from Greenpeace actually about Guiyu, so how those workers work. And also like I went there and you can totally experience how those people like living every day. So they using their bare hand to rip out all these electronic parts. So and applying acid and melting down these casings with cigarette lighters and extracting metals like coopers and shredding plastic into reusable pellets. So no one wear any protective gear. So you can imagine totally like how you smell, how you feel, how your eyes, your skin, like should supposed to be like in this kind of extreme environments. So that's totally, I feel for the girl, and I can totally step in her shoes and how she will respond and react to this situation. So I think, yes, I think Kaizong is actually someone leaving his hometown and go abroad and came back as some kind of savior, but actually he's the one who been educated and enlightened by Mimi because he didn't know a thing like how these people suffering from. So I think Mimi totally like she's like self-realization during this whole miserable process and becomes some kind of cyborg and also schizophrenia. And because there is a split personal, so there's one who tried to save the people, but the other one tried to go against the human race. So I think that's totally something I'm thinking about for quite a long time, because capitalism as a system actually is driving us towards this status like schizophrenia, because we're suffering a lot for our living style, but meanwhile it's driving us to consume even more and more electronic devices and purchase expensive cars, house, etc. But meanwhile, we feel suffering a lot. So that's why I put all these thoughts on Mimi. So she's the hero, and she's also the sacrificing characters here. So she's kind of a lot of like complicated layers there.
Well, it seems like, I mean, again, I've been reading more of your stories, and it seems like that you seem to be, you dive into a lot of kind of like, social consciousness, and I mean, are you trying to, to wake people up to these things, or is this your own, kind of your own personal, I'm just interested?
Right, I think like 10 years ago when I wrote this book, I think it's out of like intuition. So I didn't do it on purpose, but it turned out to be something very important to me and to the world. So right now, I think it's my mission to awaken the people around the world. So you deliver all this message like we have to live a more sustainable way. We have to take care of the nature and other species equally, and we have to switch our perception towards the environment and towards technology, etc. So I think that's totally right now is more on purpose when I conjuring something in my mind. So I'm thinking about what kind of message, what kind of value I try to deliver. I try to help those people, especially the younger generation. I think they're the shaper of the future, right? So what they think about our world is like crucial. So
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also it's like you're the right voice at the right time. I mean, besides the war on plastic, I mean, 2 years ago, China said stop in terms of
yeah,
importing plastic waste,
right,
and some other ways. But we do know that for like 40 years, I mean, Western countries have been exporting their recyclables to China,
right,
metal, plastic, and all these things, and it fed the Chinese industrial machine. I mean, China
right,
needed these resources, and we needed to
right,
get rid of them. But
right,
by China stopping, there's been a complete change in the
right,
globe in terms of, like, I mean, recycling markets collapsing, cities now. I mean, in the US, we're still feeling like, well, the market for recycling has dropped, and we're trying to figure out what to do with our own waste, and we're seeing
right.
more action. What about in China? What are you seeing, from your perspective? You sit in Shanghai, which
Right.
notably, last year, passed a very stringent waste sorting and collection
Right,
policy.
right.
Because maybe, we should let the people listening, if they don't know, that before until recently, I mean, the
Mhm,
people that you described, you know, recycling was all private sector. It was these,
mhm,
there were these,
right,
these individual waste pickers and private
mhm,
companies. And now
right.
it seems like the government's trying to come in and take over that sphere. But I'm kind of curious, what you're sitting in Shanghai, what are you seeing in terms of changes in terms of waste
Right.
and recycling and stuff?
Right. I think right now we're quite used to this kind of like waste sorting system. So it used to be a pain in the ass, and a lot of people, like citizens, thought that's some stupid thing to do, and also like they think it won't last for long. But now it seems like everyone get quite used to it. So people are adapted. So I think in the imported waste problem, I think the Chinese government has blocked all imports of 24 types of foreign trash since 2018 January, I think.
Mhm.
So the policy has forced recycling center like Guiyu to step up their efforts to transform informal backstreet industries into fully regulate, more technological events and environmentally friendly ones. So the air and water quality are much improved in Guiyu, while the field is still under recovering.
Mhm.
So because those heavy metals there, it takes time. So I think in big cities like Shanghai, people, especially younger generation, they start to think about their living style, their behavior, their consumer habits in a more eco-friendly way. So they will choose those brands acclaimed to use eco-friendly materials like fashion, like electronic devices, and they start to reuse some stuff
Mhm.
like the mobile phone or laptops. They might give it away to some poor area of China, like in some countryside for those kids. So I think that's a good starting point. Like people start to get aware of the urgentness of changing. So it's all starting, and the dynamic is changing now.
But what I like in China, that like even in China with the kind of recycling with or waste sorting with Chinese characteristics, like the some of the, I know in Shanghai, evidently some of the waste sorting cans that they have facial recognition on them,
Yeah.
and you have to
Right,
scan things, and so it's almost like a little like nanny state trying to make sure that you sort
right,
your,
right,
and
right.
even the little old ladies there. So I thought that was kind of intriguing. Here we're still single stream in terms of our recycling. We just all put it in a big bin, and I don't even know how much of it gets recycled, right?
Right.
But so let me ask one thing I want to point out. Back to the book is that, okay? So remember that I work. Oh, I have to remember. I want to encourage people who are tuned in today. I forgot to mention it's on your screen that if you have a question for Stanley, you can tweet us at Wilson CEF or email Eli Patton. You'll see his email just below. Sorry, I got so like jumped into our conversation. Hopefully we'll get some questions. If not, I am full of questions. So the Wilson Center is a policy think tank. And I'm a China environment policy person. So I was really tickled when at the very beginning of the book, you grabbed a section from Wikipedia that described the
Right,
Basel Convention. And I'm like,
right,
this is a very different kind of science fiction book, and I'm sure, hopefully people listening know that the Basel Convention from
right,
1989, it's an international agreement to control the transboundary movement and disposable hazardous waste. And just
right,
2 years ago, right around the time that you're, yeah, 2 years ago, there's an amendment also trying to regulate plastics as a hazardous waste. So
right.
I want to ask you now about science fiction. What do you think about works of science fiction influencing policy and hard science? Not
Mhm,
necessarily, and was that your intention with Waste Tide? So first, step back a
mhm.
bit and think about science fiction. Are you guys Are you guys there to kind of change policy or change science?
I I actually I don't think we have that kind of like ability to change policy, but I think what we can do is to influence the policymakers mindset. During this book, I think there's a lot of changes happening, not only in China, but also Southeast Asia and all those developing countries and area. They start to step up and fight against the imports of waste from developed countries, I think. So I think the more people get aware of this issues, it will become some kind of consciousness and also consensus, which is supposed to be some power to influence the policy making. So I think not a lot of people know that only 20% of the e-waste are documented and to be collected and recycled, but where all the rest goes. So that's the big why, but the big question mark. So the fact turned out to be the poor countries has to take care of the e-waste from the richer. So because the incompleteness of e-waste legislation in the developing countries, so 80% of the world population is covered by national e-waste management law. So the large increase was mainly attributed to India and China. So the most populous country in Asia currently have e-waste laws. And whereas only a handful of countries in Africa has enacted e-waste specific policy and legislation. So which means many countries lack measurable collection and recycling targets. So that's essential for effective policies. So that's what we think is so important, because you have to drive the policymaker to get awareness of the right methodology. So like how you can measure all this waste and how you can collect and recycling all these things. So I think science fiction definitely a good way to educate the people and the government.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was, as you were talking, I kind of remembered that because I have my, I have a number of old computers that are stuck in my basement or
Right.
hidden in
Right.
closets. And the reason I don't take them to a recycling, I don't know where to take them because I don't know how to guarantee that they don't end up in Guiyu.
Right.
So,
Right.
but there is change. There's change. I mean, like in the US, like interestingly, the US and China, waste could very well be a good area for the two countries, along with Europe, to be working together, because Europe is very advanced in terms of their waste policies. And the US and China are still kind of working on it. One in particular, like enhanced producer responsibility, making sure that
Right.
these electronic companies that make sure that, you produce this phone, cradle to grave responsibility.
Right.
That's something that policymakers are working towards. Um,
Right.
Now to kind of, and let's, I want to talk, now switch a little bit more into the sci-fi again. Change gears. What sci-fi authors have inspired you? Not
I think,
necessarily, yeah.
yeah. So I started to read science fiction and watch all this Star Wars, Star Trek episodes since I was a kid. Even before 10, I think it's around, I don't know, 6, 7, 8. So that's the age full of curiosity. So I think there's certainly a lot of names, legendary writers, which has huge impact on my writing and my visions. So I think Jules Verne, Arthur C. Clarke, Ursula Le Guin, Philip K. Dick, Ted Chiang, Ken Liu, Neil Stevenson, and William Gibson for sure. So the list can go on and
Yeah.
on.
I think a lot
Yeah,
of people don't know that Gibson inspired The Matrix, just
yeah, yeah,
FYI.
yeah,
Go read it, people. Um,
yeah,
so I'm glad you like Philip K. Dick, because there's something, actually, there was something in your, well, both in your Year of the Rat, and also I just got this in the mail yesterday. You have a piece in book of
yeah.
the book of Shanghai that
Right.
is a
A state
real,
of chance.
yeah, a state of trance. And I thought, wow, he must like Philip K. Dick because it was really,
Right.
and I think I told you right before the call, I have to go read that one again because you kind of, I kept reading even though it was a little confusing, but I'm going to go
Yeah.
back and read it because I think there's something there. But what's notable in this, that there was a little star that said that there were in two parts of the story, there was a star that indicated, and you know what I'm going to say, the passages marked with an asterisk were generated by AI programs trained
Right.
on deep learning of the author's style and have not therefore been subject to human editing. So
Right.
that leads me to say, and you have a new book coming out that I've pre-ordered about AI. So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about, AI writing books. I mean, why are
Right.
you doing this? And
Right. So this kind of writing experiment actually started since 2017. So when I signed up a book contract with the CITIC Press in China. So it's a collection including 6 stories happen in the near future, like discussing the relationship between human and AI, so in different areas. So there's something like a light bulb just ring. So why I don't use AI to generate something so I can put it together with my writing. So it's an AI human collaborate book. So because I used to work for Google for 5 years, so I had a lot of engineer and AI scientist friend. So I asked one of my friend, Wang Yonggang. So he's now the president of AI Research Institute of Sino Venture. Is a venture capital in China, so mostly invest in AI industry. So he's also a sci-fi fan and writer himself. He said, "Okay, I can help you to do that." So we just download some open sourcing code from GitHub, and we train it with my writing material. So it's a very raw algorithm. I have to say the model is quite immature, so it can generate something which is kind of avant-garde and and it make no sense at all. So I have to create something around it to make it feels like it's readable and it makes sense. So it's not AI who was the slave, but I am the slave of AI. So that's how everything started. So, but last year we used GPT-2. So it's a more advanced technology, which also using machine learning. So it's a bigger model. So right now we training so well with all this science fiction like broader taste and style. So right now it can really generate something very smooth and make totally sense. And sometimes I use it to co-authoring something, and is it blow me away because it generates something out of my expectation. For example, when I try to write something traveling from the Earth to the Mars, it will say, okay, you don't have to use the spacecraft because the Mars is just the opposite side of the Earth. All you gotta do is like a piece of paper, you just from this side to the other side. It's just folding the space and time. So it's that kind of space
came up with that?
working engine. So it's totally like blow me away. So I think there must be something there. So I right now use it a lot. So because it helped me to develop something unexpected. Right. So speaking of the book, AI 2041 is forthcoming in September the 14th. It's co-authoring by me and Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, the AI expert for sure. So it's 10 stories set in 10 different countries around the world over the next 20 years. So there's fictional part, but also tech analysis part. So I'm totally excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, well, I've got two streams I want to go from that, but so like it's, they often say like yesterday's science fiction is today's hard science.
Right.
And now you're taking a current hard science and you're turning it into science fiction. And but I don't just I mean I love it that it came up with the idea of folding to get you to Mars. But so here's a question about hard science. When you
Mhm.
write, how accountable are you to hard science, like what's real today? I mean, because a lot of some science fiction, sometimes you read it and you're like, this is too crazy. Like,
Yeah,
I can't read this because it's just so unbelievable. But
yeah,
what do you feel about that? Are you
yeah. I think it depends, like um your your expectation of the stories you're gonna write. So if I setting in a more scientific and plausible world building, so I'll read a lot of papers and I'll consult a lot of scientist friends to make sure, like as much as I could, that most of the details are actually real and plausible and make sense. But if I set it up like a more futuristic and scientific fantasy, or like even just there's could be some magic there, and I don't have to go with all this fact checking process because it will totally like caging my thoughts, so I'll just let it flow, so it can flow anywhere it goes. So I think it totally depends on you, so it's you who decide how the story looks like. So right now we don't speaking of like the division of hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi, because I think there's always hard and soft part in one great story. Is like the best stories you couldn't tell which is hard, which is soft, but you just got shocked and you just got so resonate to the story and the characters and the fate. So I think that's something I would love to do and explore.
No, you do that, and I have to kind of give a shout out to one of your I'm hoping I hoping she's a friend of yours, Hao Jingfang, the folding Beijing story.
Right, right,
I mean, also had a waste worker as a core story person. I'm like,
right,
wait, are
right,
you talking to Stanley? But it was unbelievable. I mean, everyone out there, you got to read Folding Beijing. But the idea,
right,
like that the city of Beijing can fold and different parts of it coming up. I mean, the science that is totally impossible. It's ridiculous. But the story was so good. And then I got to
right,
thinking, well, China. I mean, in terms of like, who knew that, like, in terms of clean energy, that China would be the world's leader in clean energy. That when China sets its mind to it, boom. And I'm like, maybe it is more realistic. That okay. Before I get too crazy here, I've got two questions. One that just came in, and one from me. I'm gonna start with my last one from me. Uh, I know that in previous interviews that you've been really fascinated with how Western science fiction came to China, and I was
right,
wondering if you might want to. I mean, and I actually, I wasn't aware of this until I was preparing to interview you about Liang Qiqiao, that because
right,
you talked
right,
about him, late Qing Dynasty scholar, social and political reformer. He's why you're a science fiction writer, I'm guessing.
right, right,
Artist.
right. Totally.
Can you explain to the audience why that is? What
Yeah,
he was?
like over 120 years ago, I think. So Liang Qichao actually, he was the one who first introduced and translate and creates some kind of utopian futuristic science fiction in China. So he's the first one. That after him, like Lu Xun and some other folks who's so important in like modern Chinese history. They also so in love with science fiction because they think it's the genre that can enlighten the people and leading the society towards a more democratic and scientific modern society in the future. So even though they failed at the very beginning, but I think their introduction and their writing definitely influenced the later on revolution like the 五四, the May the 4th movement and the new literature movement, which lead to what we are here right now, a modern China, a modern new China. So I think that's totally one example how important science fiction could be, even in like a society like China. So it's totally like different from the West, but still we still got inspiration and we got this kind of I'll say enlightenment from this genre. So I'm pretty much looking forward, because right now science fiction in China was taken as one of the most important artistic literacy and also film, TV genre in the market, because the government be so supported.
Yeah.
And yeah, even they rolled out some kind of policy to support the genre. So that's.
But I do remember a few years ago, there was something that was forbidding time travel on television shows.
Right. Right, but that's not the real time traveling. It's like 穿越, so it's kind of like fantasy. So it's you don't have to use any kind of technology, so you can jump. So that's not science fiction. Yeah.
Well, so one thing, so I've been learning a lot from you. I was curious, fun fact, did you know that Liang Qichao, that his grandson, Liang Songjie, that he was the very first person who created a registered an NGO in China. It's called Friends of Nature. Yes. So it's like, so his and Liang Songjie was a historian, and he set up this group called Friends of Nature that became an incubator, exists today for other environmental groups in China. I just thought again, another way that a science fiction story and an environmental story in China come together.
Right. Totally.
So last two questions, last minutes here. One is that, do you think that now that Chinese science fiction is busting loose here in the West, that we're around the world, people are reading Chinese science fiction. Western science fiction had a ripple effect on China. Do you see what is your sci-fi going to do to us in the West, and maybe in our thinking?
Yeah, because since we were kids, we read all of those like American, British, Japanese classic sci-fis, even the latest sci-fi fiction, science fiction and movie and TV was introduced to China very shortly. So I think right now the dynamic is changing, but still Chinese authors and their works compared to the US market is so small and so little. So, and most of them has to be translated to have the Western readers can understand it. So I think still a long way to go, but I definitely believe there's something there, like from Chinese perspective about the future, about the technology, about the environmental issue has to play an important role in this narrative, like widely, because back in the ancient time, we have this kind of like connection between the individual with the cosmos, and we have to keep the harmony among all these species, right? So that's what in our blood. So right now I try to write something upon this philosophy and in a science fiction format. So I totally believe there's something different with what I read before in the West.
Yeah, we have to give a shout out to Ken Liu, right? The most amazing translator.
Yeah, he's the man. Like
he's the man. We need more. You need to clone him. We need more. We did get a question from someone in Georgetown. Looks like Georgetown University student. Just briefly. Besides the AI, can you describe your writing process? Something just real quick. We got a couple minutes here left.
Right. When we have this kind of model, like it can trigger by imagining the search query. You can input some keywords and you can set up the background of the story, like 2021 or 2025 in Beijing or in Shanghai. So there's the backstory, and also set up the characters like Mimi or Kaizong. So you input the first sentence, like today I'm speaking with Jennifer on China Environment Forum, and you can click this button and it can automatically generate 4 options of different branches. So it's all generated by AI. So you can pick one you like, or you can delete all of them and regenerate something new.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go on and on and on, and you can delete it, and you can like
So,
put in, yeah.
so someday I'll be interviewing the Stanley AI program.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
no, but what about you? How do you? What's your writing process?
Mhm.
What, like when you just briefly,
Yeah,
like, does it come to you? I mean, you told about waist tie, but what about
yeah.
another story?
I
That how do
think
you do this?
it's quite random because I have this notebook and I have this document, like I have all these thoughts and ideas like listing in there, maybe like I accumulate all these things like for years, but there's a lot of idea like not mature enough, so you have to wait until some specific moment you think, okay, now something trigger me, I think it's time to do it. So I'll pick one concept or idea from that document, and I start to do the research around it and build up the characters and plot lines, etc., etc. So it's like how the way do it, but it's totally different to do a short story with a novel. So
Mhm.
that's totally different. So
I mean, did you write the story in here? Your trance story, was that like a was that like a one sitting thing? Because it flows in
yeah,
a really great. I
I
feel like
think
you
it,
couldn't walk away from it, or you'd forget where you were going.
yeah, it took me like I think just one morning to finish
See,
complete.
I felt that. That
Yeah,
was no,
yeah.
yeah. So I will reread it again tonight, and I'll get back to you about what I thought of it. So I want to thank Kalius Menon for that question about how you do your writing.
Mhm,
One final note, again for the with back to the AI, and
mhm.
because you mentioned that you worked at Google, and I guess do you know that Google has got this kind of AI impact challenge? Have you heard about that?
Sure, sure, I
And
know. Yeah.
and I was online watching the videos, and there was really cool. There was a gentleman in Kampala who developed an air quality monitoring AI. And he said,
Right.
because the issue is that, I mean, you could put monitoring on top of buildings, but Kampala is so big. And so they came
Right.
up with creating a mobile one to attach it to the motorcycles. And the goal is that, because you getting the data on how bad the air pollution is, it informs the government maybe how they're failing or where they're failing.
Right.
But I mean, I was curious if any of the stories in your new book, are you talking, is the AI stories at all about environment?
Yes. I think there are a couple of stories like touch on the environmental issue. For example, there's one story set in Australia. So actually is talking about how the government using this green power. So like the electricity becomes so cheap, even it's for free, and how people using AI to protect the greater coral reef. So because they can use this like underwater robots to detect how this the environmental all these data, how this species living status, so we can do things accordingly. So definitely there's a lot of like elements there talking about climate change
Mhm.
and biodiversity and also environmental issues, etc., and how we can use technologies such as AI to change the situation. But it needs like all these tech people, all these big companies, all this government, all these stakeholders, and each one of us be aware of the issues, and we have to put technology in good hands.
Yeah. Well, one thing I have to say, that good segue, that actually next month, I'll have the date. It'll come up in another week, I think. That we're actually going to put on a meeting with the UNEP has a project called Countermeasures that's looking how to
Mhm.
track the hot spots of
Right.
plastic waste leakage in the Mekong. So there's little submarines, there's satellites, but there's still people. You still need the
Mhm.
boots on the ground, the people involved. But again, it's people working with technology. Google's involved with it, starting to get involved with it too. So it's really,
Right.
I mean, so in some ways, like, you're near, the near fiction sci-fi guys like you. I mean, it's pretty amazing what you're doing. I think we've come to the end of our conversation, and I'm going to keep in touch with you because I know that there's going to be cool, your AI book. We have to have you back probably. Have to thank besides my project, the Wilson Center Science, Technology, and Innovation Program co-sponsored this event. So that's why I got a bunch more techie people watching today. But Stanley, thank you so much for talking to us, and good luck with. I mean, I'm going to read that book, and I'll let you know what I think of it. Your AI one, okay? Thanks again.
A lot of fun. Thank you,
Thanks.
Jennifer.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good day.